Welcome back, everyone. This is the Changelog, and I'm your host, Adam Stacoviak. This is episode 169, and on today's show, we're talking to Thomas Reynolds, the maker of Middleman. We wanted to have this conversation for quite a while. We're Rubyists at our core here at the Changelog, and we use Middleman every single week to ship Changelog Weekly. We built that in Middleman. We're also building another site for Beyond Code in Middleman. Check that out at beyondcode.tv. That's our brief interview series we shoot at conferences, after parties. But Rubyists at our core here at the Changelog. We love Middleman. Great conversation today with Thomas. We have three awesome sponsors: CodeShip, TopTal, and DigitalOcean. Our first sponsor for the show is CodeShip. They've launched a brand new feature called Organizations, and I've talked to several teams who love this new feature because now you can create teams, set permissions for specific team members, and improve collaboration in your continuous delivery workflows. You can maintain centralized control of your organization's projects and teams with this brand new feature. Save 20% off any premium plan you choose for 3 months by using the code The Changelog Podcast. Again, that code is The Changelog Podcast, and you'll save 20% off any premium plan you choose for 3 months. Head to codeship.com/thechangelog to get started. And now on to the show. All right, we're back. We got a great show lineup for you today. We have been wanting to talk about Middleman forever. And when I say forever, it's like the Sandlot forever. I've been using Middleman for a long time. Jared, how about you? Have you been using Middleman for a while?
Actually, my first time with Middleman was when you brought me in on Changelog Weekly.
Okay, so that was...
Which was, maybe 6 or 7 months ago.
Well, luckily it was a Ruby thing. I've been using
it a lot lately, yeah.
So we got Thomas Reynolds on the line here. He is the creator of Middleman. Thomas, hey, what's up?
Hey, how you doing, all?
So you're the technical director at Instrument. It's an independent digital creative agency. Is that your thing, or is that somebody else's thing?
That's someone else's thing. We're a company of about 100, 110 people in Portland, Oregon.
Okay.
We're all centrally located, no remote workers, and we just do really high-end digital marketing.
Nice, man. Also the creator of Middleman, and a foodie, book nerd, writer, and obviously a Rubyist, because you couldn't be the creator of Middleman without being a Rubyist first, right?
Yeah, it doesn't happen accidentally.
So for those listening, Middleman is a Ruby gem. It's a static site generator. And how long has it been around, Thomas?
In its current stable form, it's been out for 3 years. I just checked on GitHub. Time since first commit in the repo is just a little over 7 years.
Wow. I was going to say, it feels like so long.
Ancient open source roots at this point.
Yeah, definitely. If you get past 5, it's getting into it's like the Cars or suddenly a classic.
Yeah, no, it's like marriage. Like, it's just, I wake up every day and I do it, and I keep doing it every single day, and it'll always probably be here with me.
There you go. So before we kick off the full-on show and dive deep into Middleman, let's figure out who you are a bit. Kind of give us a bit about who you are. You already mentioned Instrument and the things you do there, so kind of give us a bit about your history and who you are as a software developer.
Yeah, so I've been in software development and mostly agency stuff for about 16 years now. I got started really young, kind of grew up with the internet, and was able to, be a kid in high school and actually contribute to open source, and also, to just fan sites and stuff. So I got my start programming, making levels for TIE Fighter, the flight sim video game for the PC way back in the day. And then I moved from there to like fan sites for that. And eventually it's like, oh, hey, I need to learn this SQL thing. Hey, I need to learn this HTML, whatever, 3 or whatever it was back then. And so, yeah, I got my starts like just doing super nerdy stuff on the internet. Did that for a couple of years, and went off to school for a CS degree, then realized I was writing less code at school than I had been in my own free time. So I kind of dropped out, switched to like a more liberal degree, and just, with a lot of reading, which was a lot more fun for me, and then put all my passion back into software development on like the open source side. Since becoming a full-grown adult, I've been doing agency stuff now, oh boy, probably like 8 to 10 years, pretty much nonstop. So I've never really done any product stuff. I've never really done any startup stuff. I just kind of like the heavy churn and like frequent new kinds of ideas that you have to do like in an agency lifestyle.
You ever got the itch, the startup itch?
No, not really. I moved to Portland to get away from that stuff, so I'm, I'm happy. I'm happy. Just I don't know. I like doing new things. I probably
Hmm.
get a little bit bored. Other than Middleman, I tend to like discard side projects. So, um, yeah. But yeah.
Slightly
So
off topic, since you're living
totally.
in Portland, I'm a huge fan of Portlandia. I
Hmm.
absolutely love that show. Are you? Do you watch the show since you sort of live it every day, or do you just skip it?
I don't really watch it. But
Are you
when it
offended
first
by
came
it?
out, people, yeah, that's like exactly the question people have. Actually, no, I think it's, the way I try to phrase this to people is a lot of people would see those caricatures as an insult, and we take them as a point of pride, and that's just because we're weird. Um, like, if we could get more people on weird bikes, that would be perfectly cool for us. That's why a lot of us moved here.
Love Portlandia,
Um,
man.
Yeah, it's a great show, and they're well-meaning. And like,
Yeah.
I know Carrie grew up, somewhere here in the Northwest, so
Right.
I'm pretty sure she's well-meaning about it all too.
I think it's the first time, Jared, on the show I heard somebody say they quit their CS degree to go and code more.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
so I went to
interesting.
Arizona State, which is not necessarily known for its computer science degree, but it was cheap. They launched a rocket once to Mars, and it deactivated as soon as it landed. So that pretty much tells you what you need to know about the program there. So I think Java, Sun, or I guess it was still Sun then, poured a ton of money into the school. So I wrote 2 years of Java, which was not terribly exciting projects.
And given
What
your
turned you
current,
on?
Oh, sorry,
Go ahead.
Jared, go ahead.
I was gonna say what turned you on originally to the open source world.
That's a good question. Trying to think back, it was probably actually I just honestly don't remember. So as soon as I got into like agency stuff after college, I did a lot of PHP, which is always kind of like a vaguely open source community. I don't know the actual structure, but they were pretty open, and there was pretty a large amount of community involvement, like as that language grew. So I did a lot of that, and this is all pre-GitHub, so open source was like this thing that took place on mailing lists, and maybe someone hosted a site you could download like a tarball or something and install it, but there wasn't. It didn't feel like there was as big of a community as there is now. There were IRC channels that we could communicate, but it was probably something PHP based. One of the database wrappers or something like that. I probably contributed stuff too early. So yeah, basically did a lot of PHP for years and years. Discovered Ruby right as the great Rails explosion happened. Fell in love with it, especially since PHP was basically Perl at the time. Got to use some things from CS that I hadn't used in a little while, like objects and classes and all the core object-oriented stuff that's in Ruby. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I started using Ruby Rake specifically for a lot of tooling stuff for my front-end work. So every time I was at a okay agency, but we did mostly email templates, and it got to the point where it was like 4 to 6 email templates a day was the job, and most of that stuff can just be automated. Like MailChimp will automate all that stuff for you now. You just kind of upload a couple things to them.
Right.
So started using Rake and started building out just little helpers, little tooling bits for myself.
Interesting. It might make some sense to rewind a little bit, though. Given your agency experience, I do have a couple thoughts earmarked for that, getting closer to that subject. But might make sense since in terms of the Git history, I think you said it was 7 years Git history you've got for Middleman. So
Yeah.
we're definitely talking about quite a bit of space and and time in there in terms of the space that Middleman occupies, which is the static site generator space.
Totally.
There's been lots out there in every kind of language you could think of. Jared and I, we both have Ruby roots, so we kind of go back with all of that. But at the same time, I think a lot of at least what I can tell from my perspective is a lot of the static site generators came from the Ruby world and sort of spread out to the other languages. So what do you know of the history of these generators, and where did Middleman come from, and what problems was it solving when it first became something for you?
Totally. So yeah, kind of when I was like doing that email template work, the other thing you wanted to automate at the same time was HTML and CSS. And this was right about the time that Haml had come out. And so that just took a lot of the work out of, doing just incredible amounts of tables and all the stuff we had to do for emails back in the day. So I started looking around for some tools at the time. I think Nanoc existed.
Yeah,
Static
remember that
Matic
one.
existed. I'm not entirely sure if Jekyll existed publicly yet, but it was all about that time.
Looking back, and Jekyll looks like their initial launch was like end of 2008. So it's probably out there.
Yeah, it was probably being talked about on the blogosphere or whatever we called it.
Right.
Yeah, so I liked Staticmatic personally. It was already open source. You could already, check out all the code, and it was pretty easy to get code back upstream with that team. So I started using Staticmatic for myself, and got into the forums and kind of got involved with that community. And basically, slowly over time, I committed a larger and larger share of the pull requests until the point where the original creator was, didn't have the time for it as much anymore. So we basically, the 1.0 of Middleman is somewhat of a fork of Staticmatic. So we just kind of renamed it, moved the repos, and moved a lot of the community stuff over into my name.
I did not know that part, that it was sort of a fork, because I feel like Staticmatic is where it all began. It sounds like that's what you said too. Is that right?
Yeah, at least for me. I mean, I know Nanic existed, and it seemed at a glance to be more complicated than I wanted to get into. I never really went all the way down that road, so I can't actually say if that's true. Mm-hmm. But Staticmatic kind of matched up a little bit more to how I wanted to use the tool.
Adam, I don't know if you remember, a little bit of my roots was in the Perl community in college, and my first kind of exposure to blogging at all was because basically my professor told us we had to blog, and they gave us this Perl thing. I think it was called like Blogsome, something like that. Mm-hmm. And it was a static site generator in Perl. This is like 2005, 2006. And I thought it was super lame. And then I found WordPress, and I was like, why would I want to have static sites when I can have dynamic, like changing, database-driven WordPress, sites? Mm-hmm. And then there's obviously reasons why you would want to have a static site. We can get into all that, but it was kind of funny because once Jekyll dropped in Staticmatic, I started seeing this like rise of these static site generators. I was like, what is wrong with these people?
Yeah.
Like, why aren't we like WordPress? And these things are cool, like static files. Like that's.
I had a similar thought when I don't think I've ever shared this story publicly, but when Win and I started this show together way back in 2009, and the first time I met Win was at a Ruby meetup here in Houston. And he was doing a presentation on something new they had done, and they had just rebuilt the Squeegee website, which was Win's original consultancy before he sort of went independent and then ultimately went to GitHub. He loved Staticmatic, and he was giving a presentation on it, and I was like, same thing. Why? And I was a WordPress guy at the time, like I was using that stuff. Why would I, learn and write Ruby only to create static sites? I don't get it. But it was a big thing then.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I like I said, I got into it to make HTML email, but there was no option other than static, right? Because you just throw this thing over to wire, and it's got to all be self-contained.
Right.
But yeah, I think it's kind of really interesting over the years. Like, and as Middleman has gained popularity, there's something happened, and I don't know if it was, we got tired of the complexity, we got tired of like the stack churn or the security issues around like full like back-end apps, but there's definitely now, you see all these blog posts coming around that are just like, there's no reason not to do static. I mean, almost everything you can accomplish other than like a form and maybe e-commerce, you can do statically, and then you never have to worry about, any security implications.
Yeah, I remember my tune started to change when I would consistently see different WordPress sites get taken down by, I think it was Dig back then.
Yes.
The Dig effect or something like that, and it would just crush under a little bit of load. And that's when I started saying, okay, static HTML files makes a lot of sense in that regard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, also, I mean, just because I come from an agency background before, like the modern age, that's what we deliver. That's what our contracts say we deliver. We deliver like this static packet of a website. And if you want to throw it into a Rails app, or if you want to just like drag FTP it to some, GoDaddy server, that's up to you. So there's also a lot of that kind of work is self-contained in that way.
That's kind of leading into, I guess, the slightly a good segue into the next step, which is given your agency experience now at Instrument. I got to imagine that a lot of what you've done with Middleman over the years, with the contributors and your core team and the contributors who've helped get Middleman to where it is now today, I got to imagine a lot of that's playing back into your full time.
A little bit. I pretty much do nothing but JavaScript on my day job. I manage a team of people as well. But for the most part, I had tried to keep the two separate. I didn't want to you know, I made this thing, therefore we should use it, especially before it got enough popularity to kind of justify that kind of stuff. So I've always just kind of left it on the side. If people ask about it in like Slack or something, I'll be like, oh yeah, I know how that thing works. But yeah, maybe in the last year, we've actually been hiring people and they've come in the door knowing it. So now we do tend to use it on a lot more projects, and I am a little more hands-on with like actually adding features or, fixing specific bugs from people in-house.
So you said the original crux that was sort of originally somewhat of a fork of Static-Matic. The problems initially were, HTML email driven. Is that when it was? That was obviously Middleman version 1. How has Middleman changed over the years in terms of the problems it's been solving and the evolving problem it's been solving?
Yeah, so I just looked, 1 and 2 were these kind of small releases that I don't know how many people were actually using it, probably people who moved on from Static-Matic. There's also a period of time there where Jekyll went completely unmaintained, other than like the Octopress work that was happening. So I think we got a lot of people from there, but I just looked it up, and we've been on the current stable branch since 2012. I think that's when it really kind of took off, and that's when I was also doing Rails stuff on the side, and I wanted to align the two kind of workflows. So rather than just being like, it's a whole separate tool, I wanted it to be like conceptually, you could come directly over from Rails, and then, if you can just make a static site, or you can put a static site in your Rails if you want to like keep one piece separate or a little more secure. So yeah, I think version 3 was like the big leap forward. Built it on top of some of the MERB stuff, which eventually became in the Rails, but I used a lot of their tooling. We still use internally for a lot of our code the Padrino library.
Yeah.
That's like a Sinatra-alike for Rails. And then whenever we have like a discussion on API, we try to go check out the Rails API and make sure we're keeping things as similar as possible so we can bring people over from the rest of the Ruby community.
Do you mean things like rendering parcels, different helpers that are available in Rails that people so people can essentially copy and paste views, but to a degree potentially back into a Rails app?
Yeah, I mean, we still have like a huge reliance on YAML for like configuration. We have all the helpers, like you said, like your normal link helpers, your localization helpers, we bring over directly. We support, I think, every templating language that could possibly exist in some fashion. So definitely all the Ruby stuff, most of the JavaScript stuff, pretty much any language that can be, shelled out to and come back, we support that.
Very cool.
So there have been tons of these tools over the years. We've mentioned a few here. I think there was one called Stasis. There's been a lot of them. Webby was one. I think I used Webby back in the day. All Ruby tools. And yet
Serve.
Middleman, what's that? Serve? I don't know that one.
It's not being maintained now, but it was one that John Long had mentioned. We talked about that on the Octopress show with Brandon Mathis.
Very cool. So Middleman has stood out from the crowd. It's kind of been more successful. It's gotten more. It's obviously been sustained longer, but it has more excitement around it. More people using it. Big players like Thoughtbot, and there's a couple more on your website that I can't think of off the top of my head. But MailChimp, thank you. So, can you attribute that to anything in particular? Was it pure luck, or is there something about Middleman that stands out from the crowd?
Yeah, I actually think I have a kind of different opinion about open source from the rest, or at least the modern kind of JavaScript crowd, which I don't think things should be throwaway. I think there's a responsibility attached to saying, I want you to spend your days and hopefully not your nights coding with my thing. And that, it kind of sucks when you have to maintain that for years and years and years. But that's like the bargain you're making by publicly saying, hey, go use my thing. I put it on GitHub. So I think what I contribute most of Middleman's success to is basically stability and like respect for people's time. So, we've been at 3.0 stable for a little over 3 years now. And the APIs are pretty much the same. If you go make it a site like a year ago, it's going to be exactly the same now. Things aren't going to change under your feet. and you're just going to have like a stable like platform. It's not that complicated. The things we do are pretty self-contained. So we just do those things well and get out of your way as quickly as possible. And we've done it for 3 years. So, there wasn't like, oh, I got to switch. I mean, there will be soon, but there wasn't like, I got to switch to the Rails 4 rewrite. Like, what am I going to do with myself?
Right.
I'm glad you say that, because that's actually an issue I've had with the static generators over the years, is that I would build something, let's say a one-off simple static site for somebody, and then have to go back and like make an update or something like that to it. And then, building it locally or something like that becomes an issue because the latest version breaks things. And then I got to spend another hour or so trying to fix things or link to helpers or just weird things that have changed in the APIs of like the little things. And the stability to me was a big thing for Middleman, because I'd gone through Static-Matic and several others. And then finally, I'm using something like Middleman, almost every time I do something static, unless it's actually really static, and never having to deal with those issues where I don't touch it for 6 months and it's still the same. I could just run it.
Yeah, we want to fight that whole hype churn cycle.
Yeah.
Like, there's no reason for that. There are so few really revolutionary ideas. And you know what? I like maybe take the Ember community's stance on it. Like, if they're really revolutionary, we'll fold it in and we'll do it stably, slowly over time, and we'll document it well. But I'm not going to jump on the hype train, and break your site from a year ago. It's great we have tools like Bundler now that can protect us from a lot of that kind of, come back to a thing 6 months later and it's not working anymore. But, you should also be able to do bundle update and not have your entire world explode.
I like that. So you have this commitment to reliability and stability, and you've been doing that over the years. That's pretty rare in open source.
Very.
And so I wonder, like, why? Like, what do you get out of it? What is it?
I don't know what I get out of it.
Okay.
Inertia.
Inertia.
I like doing it. I don't know. So we have a couple community like outlets from Middleman. So there's like public chat channels. There's a public forum. What else is there? I don't remember. There was an email group at some point. But basically, I don't go there. Like, I set up these systems for the community to, self-help. And then I only respond on GitHub pull requests or Twitter harassment. And I think that's also another thing. Like, if you're just in the trenches there, like, managing the forum day in and day out, I think you get to see people telling you that you kind of ruined their weekend because you wrote some bad bug. I think it maybe drags on you a little bit more, but I try to keep myself completely separate from that. And people in the community have stepped up and been those kind of like community leaders, and it all works out for everyone.
Yeah, looking at the forum now, it's pretty active. I mean,
Yeah.
A lot of people in there. I mean, I'm not diving into a lot of these notes here, but I'm just scrolling this endless scroll. A lot of stuff happened.
Yeah, a lot of that is just holes in documentation where all for documentation is on GitHub. It's all community contributed to. So I did like a bunch of the big chunks of initial writing, but it's all kind of maintained itself through people, not quite being able to parse a sentence, or, I'm not making the right point that they're trying to get to, or I, put something on the wrong page. But you're never going to be able to document everything. Again, kind of like the Ember model, I went with like a plain text tutorial style for my documentation, as opposed to API docs, which are a little more, provide better coverage, but are kind of harder to understand if you don't know what's going on inside the system. So that just leaves like narratively like a feature missing just because I couldn't fit it onto any of the pages. And I think the forum is really good about that. Just being like, hey, there's this thing. Why isn't it documented? Well, like 4 people use it, but here it is on the forums for you.
So if a doc needs updated, someone could go to GitHub, fork it, and let's say like a misspelling or something's changed, someone from the community, whether they're in the core team or not, could step in and help out as needed.
And there's a pull request button at the bottom of every page on the documentation site, so we make that as easy as possible.
So we talked a little bit about its makeup. Can we talk a little bit about, let's say, like a file structure? You said it's a lot like the Rails view layer. Was that on purpose? Did you look at the Rails view layer and say, this is how it should be? This is how a Middleman site should be structured and how it should be laid out? Is it really meant to be a lot of plug and play in between that and Rails?
Kind of. I don't think we follow the file layout of Rails because they've got a pretty deep named structure. The way our philosophy works is you have a source directory, and conceptually, you look at everything in there, and that's what you get on the way out. You can do some metaprogramming, you can do all these fancy configuration options, but we try to do a one-to-one from that folder to your build folder. So if I have index.html.erb, I'm going to get an index.html out. So for most people's sites, you shouldn't have like all this magic happening. You should just be able to say, it's a pipeline. You come in as Sash, you come out as CSS. So it matches, the structure of source matches however you want to structure your code. So if you want a fonts directory, have at it. If you want to put it inside your CSS, that's fine with us too.
And the reason why I ask is because I think and I could be wrong here, but it's at least happened to me several times, is that, I'm a Rubyist only to a certain point, or I'm a back-end developer only to a certain point, that I don't do it because there's people who are better than me at it. And I may want to go buck wild on the Vue and build out a site, but I don't have, all the routes in place and all these different things that sort of stand in your way when you work in a Rails team. And it felt always a lot easier to sort of like build out something statically, with all the URLs and all these different things that I think of as a UX or designer standpoint or a front-end builder standpoint, and build, a good portion of my prototype or even my prototypes to prove to the business team, like, hey, we can build this, or this is the direction we should go. I'll build that in Middleman with almost zero resistance and really not a lot of Ruby knowledge beyond, what the docs could easily provide in terms of Middleman routing and stuff, and then give that over to my Rails team or demonstrate that and be able to take a lot of what I've done already and just pull it right into the Rails app with almost no issues.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of like we map to the way it used to be on the front end. You pop open a new folder, you open Notepad or whatever, and you just start making files, your static files, and you wrote all your HTML, you wrote all your CSS, and you put 50 script tags into your HTML. And, the reason we don't do some of those things now is because, Sass is faster. Templating is faster. We want to compress things smaller for the end user, but none of those are like changing the flow. So Middleman steps in and says, I'll handle concatenating all your JavaScript. I'll handle your shortcuts in Sass. Just keep writing, the same kind of straightforward, completely back-end free approach to, front-end coding.
The cool thing about long-term projects is there's lots of things that change over the years, and then there's lots of things that stay the same. And it seems like when you strike a chord early on in architecture or those big decision-making, you can just kind of refine over the years. And Thomas, you recently wrote a post on your blog, which I believe is award-winning Fjords, that's correct, right? That's like the best website name I think I've ever heard. I'm pretty jealous of it.
I also have the Fjords Twitter account, but I haven't figured out what to do with it.
Yeah, just hold on to that baby and just wait for the check.
There's a Norwegian hardcore band who I always get subtweeted by, which is pretty cool.
Completely off topic, but kind of related is the guy who had the Alphabet account on Twitter.
I saw that.
Oh man, he's sitting on a gold mine there after Google renamed. But so yeah, maybe Fjord. Maybe someday you'll have some large company rename themselves to Fjord, and you'll just be sitting on it.
I like it.
But you've had over the years you refine your thoughts, you refine even the way you write code. And it seems like that is something that's happened to you in kind of dramatic ways. You recently published a post back in March called My Weird Ruby, where you go through kind of how you write Ruby code today and how that's way different from probably back in 2010 when you started Middleman. So I'm going to tee that up. We need to take a break, hear from a sponsor, but on the other side of the sponsor break, I want to hear your thoughts on why your Ruby is weird and how that has affected Middleman 4. So we'll be right back.
You've heard me talk about TopTal several times on this podcast, but today is different. I've got a special treat for you. I went out and spoke with a listener who a year ago had never heard of TopTal. He listened to the show just like you're doing right here, right now, today, and heard us talk about TopTal and what they're all about, and he decided to get in touch. And now he's living the dream as a freelance software developer with TopTal. His name is Daniel Elzon, and I sat down and I talked with him. I said, hey, what is it that you love most about TopTal? Take a listen.
Well, for me, the thing about TopTal, which I thought would be very hard for me personally as I transitioned to a more consulting role, was the way I would have access to new clients and what quality those would be. So I found that I've had access to awesome clients through TopTal, and it hasn't been that hard to find because they have a lot of choice. And even more than that, there's enough choice, and I can actually be a little selective about what kinds of things I want to be working on. So I use that as a way to sort of hone my skills and go towards the technology that I think are worth investing in for the future. So whether it's, including new front-end frameworks or doing a little DevOps work on the side, I usually am able to find clients who have the needs of the things I want to get better at. So that's been truly useful.
All right, that was Daniel Lazan, a listener of the changelog and also a freelance software developer with TopTal. If you want to follow in Daniel's footsteps, go to toptal.com/developers. That's TOPTAL.com/developers to learn more about what TopTal's all about and tell them the changelog sent you.
All right, everybody, we're back speaking with Thomas Reynolds about Middleman. And Thomas, you've been working on Middleman 4 for a while now. You've recently published a blog post entitled My Weird Ruby, wherein you state, over the past year, I've been rewriting large portions of the Middleman codebase to better reflect how I like to write code, as opposed to the silly version of mine.
Typo.
Typo.
We'll fix that before
Typo's
it goes out.
exposed. Breaking news here on the changelog. There's a typo in a blog post. As opposed to the silly version of the old person 6 years ago. So you've been rewriting a lot since. You've learned things. You've changed your style. And that's kind of dramatically affected the Middleman code base. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, totally. So kind of like I said, I do a lot of JavaScript at work. I do Ruby for Middleman. I have done Clojure. I have done Java, and got into some Haskell. And I like to try as many different languages as possible. And there's always good ideas. You can bring them all back. So I can write another post later called My Weird JavaScript because it's equally silly, but it's kind of got the same gist. Yeah, like when I started Middleman, Ruby was getting popular, but Ruby is also kind of a minefield of features. Some great stuff in there. There's some stuff you should never ever use. I think, like Rails 2 had a bunch of these, just mix-ins forever, or, duck typing and all these kind of very famously Ruby features that you probably wouldn't want to use in production.
Alias method chaining. Yeah.
Alias method chaining.
That
was a good one. Yeah, so, that's how Middleman 2 looked like. That's what Middleman 3 pretty much looked like, with some more inspiration from Rails 3, which has a lot more of this kind of, I don't know, they have a completely crazy mix-in inheritance chain thing that's still in there that I don't understand. But so that's what, it looks a lot like Rails. But, it's been 2-3 years since that stable version. I've just been making bug fixes on there, and then I spend most of my day doing other languages. So I've just come up with a bunch of things, seen a bunch of things in other languages that I like, and I want to bring them back. So every time I would fix a bug in the stable branch of Middleman, I would realize that this could have been solved. Like I would have, if I had just used something from Haskell, if I just used something from Clojure, this would never have been a problem. So I think the biggest one for me is maturing as a developer and deciding that I actually do like static typing. And, all the loose typing of Ruby was a really big selling point when it was first coming out, because people are coming out of the Java world and such. But you know what? Those things caught bugs. They caught bugs without writing tests. And I think being able to type your code, especially public code that other people are going to want to interact with as a public API, is a really good approach. So I discovered this library about a year ago called Contracts, which uses a lot of metaprogramming magic to wrap every single variable and every single method with a little wrapper, and then you define what kind of things should go into the function and what kind of things are allowed to come out of the function, and this little wrapper will check them and throw exceptions if you're in dev mode or test mode. And so that just allows you to say, there's a lot of places where in Middleman and in Ruby, you say, here's a method, it's called, I'm looking at one here, find. It could take a symbol, it could take a string, it could try to turn those two into the same thing. It could take a regex, you never know. And there's a lot of these kind of open, magical APIs throughout Rails in the Ruby world. I decided I didn't like that very much. So I went whole hog with this contracts library, and I added type information to every single variable and definition inside of my Middleman code. And what that gave me was an insane number of bug reports that my test suite of, something like 4,200 tests didn't catch. Just like, then people were probably saying, oh yeah, like I know to put a symbol here. They don't know to put a symbol here. And the amount of documentation they would need to figure that out, it's just, they're never going to look it up. So that was like the first big refactor to Middleman 4. And it's completely, opaque to the user. That's just for me. So I can catch bugs earlier. And so I feel a little safer when I'm working with this relatively large code base.
So that just begs the question, you're basically adding like static type checking to Ruby. I guess Why not just, try a different language?
Yeah, I mean, that just goes back to my stability thing.
Yeah.
I mean, the roots are in the community. My contributors speak Ruby. The big rewrite is always a terrible idea, especially if you're switching languages. You might as well just start a whole new thing. And that would have been a lot of work. It's not a tiny code base. Doing a lot of weird stuff. I feel like if I could, I would maybe have rewritten it in Clojure, but then at the time, getting Clojure up and running was kind of a pain. Nowadays, I think you can just run it right through Node, which is pretty cool. But at the time, it wasn't the best fit. There has been rumors, of gradual typing being added to future versions of Ruby. So this may be a feature that I just switch to the official support if that comes down the road.
I've never heard of this contracts library. Can you tell me where it's at or talk about it a bit?
It's just called contracts.ruby. It's a little hard to find, but it's, I think
it's got such a general name. It's really hard to search for.
Yeah. So like, it's not really typing. It's just designed by contract concept, which is basically lightly enforced types. Like things will still work. It'll just be able to complain about it.
Right.
So I don't know where it came from, but the gentleman who runs it has started updating it a lot more recently, and there's third-party contributors adding code to it now. So it seems like it's kind of gaining a little popularity. I would never use it in production. The whole point of this thing is, it throws an exception during your test suite, not, when someone's actually trying to use your code.
Is this something that you've heard of, Jared?
Well, I heard of it in March when I read his blog post, but I haven't heard of it elsewhere.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, so it's active. That's great. When I was using it, it actually was inactive. It would just been like an experiment that someone had put together. So a little bit risky, but it's pretty easy to comment out. It's just every single one of these definitions starts with the word contract. It's a pretty easy search and replace to go back to the old buggy version. But I found I really enjoy it. I'm looking to decorators in JavaScript to add some more functionality on the JavaScript side, so I can add some type information and have it caught by the test suite.
So Adam and I are in a bit of a unique position because we have a site which we use to generate our weekly newsletter, Changelog Weekly, which is a Middleman 3 site. And we've also been working on a new site for our video series Beyond Code, which is a Middleman 4 site, because I hopped on the beta because I like pain, I guess. Actually, it hasn't been too painful. A few things. And I can definitely attest to the fact that this contracts piece is completely invisible to an end user, because I would have never even known about it had it not been for this post. One thing I have felt as an end user is you've also introduced a lot of immutable data structures. Can you speak about that? And then maybe I can give you a little bit of feedback from my perspective.
Totally. Yeah, that also just comes from my experience in these kind of more functional languages. They tend to prevent a large class of bugs just because you're not doing weird loops and messing with your stuff. One bug we got a lot back in the day was we have this directory of data files, and there's YAML information in it. And so from the templating side, you can go ahead and say, grab the first 5 people from this YAML file. And people would go add another person to that array and then expect it to persist, and also expect it to somehow sync back to the data side, to the actual file structure. And so one of the main reasons for going with, it's still kind of an experiment. I put in Hamster, which is one of these kind of wrapper libraries. And so you talk about a hamster hash instead of like a native Ruby hash. And what it basically does is just doesn't give you methods to alter data that's not allowed to be altered, like this kind of static YAML data. I put like a lot of things in version 4. I think I tried to refactor without touching the API to tools that I like a little bit more. That one is definitely the newest, and I've also run into surprises around it, especially if you don't even know it's there, and suddenly it's throwing these crazy errors at you. So yeah, I would love to hear some stuff about that. And I think that trying to get people on the beta so we can flush this out, but that's going to be day one, 4.0 stable.
Right.
There'll be probably 30 bug reports and try to get the messaging right around it, I think.
Yeah, I think my experience is mostly around what you said when you don't even know that that's what you're working with. And it's kind of like the uncanny valley where it's like it's almost an array or it's almost a hash until you find out that it's not. And the specific thing that I hit quite often is probably difficult to explain on air like this. But I am using the data directory, and basically what we have is a bunch of seasons of the show, and then each season has some episodes kind of nested inside of it. And in certain cases, I was trying to like just flatten, so I like mapping over the seasons to get the episodes, and then flatten that into a single array of episodes. And you can't flatten a hamster data set, probably because it's immutable, right? Although with the flatten call, I was trying to return a new one. Yeah, I should have just returned a new one.
It really should have worked.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a great call out.
Well,
if it's not one-to-one with like
now.
the native Ruby stuff, then that's definitely a problem.
the truth,
Unfortunately, the like native Ruby API is expansive and
yeah, exactly,
editable.
Yeah.
So I'll take a look at that and see if they just got some missing. It might just be an alias, right? Like
right.
half the things on the Ruby hash and array libraries are aliases for 3 other things. It's kind of crazy.
Right. Yeah, I guess it turns out we brought you on air just to bug report for you. So
the only thing more exciting than live coding is live bug reporting.
live bug reports.
I want to have everybody's ear.
Just the facts, please.
Yeah, exactly. Now it has to get fixed, right? Because it's on air.
Yeah, totally.
So you have so you got contracts. You're playing with immutability, and I think that's just a great point that when you have a beta, and even yours has been in beta for a while now. Like the point of a beta is for people to hop on and do the bug reporting, but you actually don't get very many until you announce that that official release, and then all of a sudden everything kind of just swarms in. I wonder if there's is there any way we can make that? Stuff. Can we fix that problem? Is there any way? I don't know.
I don't know. So this is kind of a tangent, but there was a pretty good blog post. I'll dig up the URL for you later. But it was, always use simple tools. And it kind of has this philosophy. It's like, it shouldn't surprise you. It should just be simple and get out of its way and do its job, and then you should go home. So I don't know if I want to ask people to spend their weekends or their extra time, making their work stuff work for my beta. But and actually, I'm not entirely sure how smooth the upgrade process is going to be. We removed a lot of features. We removed redundant features. So a lot of we didn't remove functionality, but there might be a little bit of editing. So we'll try to figure out. Ember again does a really great job with these upgrade guides. We're going to try to figure out a way to document and say we expect this to take you an hour or 2 hours, so you don't just go down a rabbit hole trying to upgrade to this.
Mm-hmm. So I find just back to the conversation about the kind of the weird Ruby style, and a related question around that is, you have years and years of writing Ruby. You're obviously a JavaScript developer as well, and it sounds like you have some exposure to Clojure and a few other languages. So here we are, mid 2015, and there's a lot of new and exciting languages kind of out there. Ones that are kind of capturing the hearts of many developers are things like Go. I think Rust is pretty exciting to a lot of people. Of course, the functional languages like Clojure as well. Are you still bullish on Ruby after all these years, or are your eyes starting to wander into these other camps?
It just depends what kind of project you want to build. I would never, go and, if you just want a straight, fast API to just crank out some JSON, Go is really good for that. Mm-hmm. If you want to build a web server, Rust is probably really good for that. I would probably never build a web server in Ruby. That would be crazy. Yeah. So I think everything's got its place. I think Ruby still reigns supreme mostly because of Rails. Just I need a website, I need a traditional front end, back end, and this is the most stable, most secure one you can probably get, other than maybe some PHP stuff. But it's definitely the most fun to work in for that trade off. So I think it'll be in that space for a while. We still use it at work, so it's not going anywhere. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right.
I am opposite. What is the opposite of bullish?
Bearish.
Bearish.
Yeah.
I am bearish on JavaScript still. So,
Are you really?
Yeah. So I mean, I dread the day when I just remember like you're on the plane and like the kiosk crashes with a Windows warning. I dread the day when I see like JavaScript crashed in Chrome as like my airplane warning.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's probably one of the worst languages we have to use on a reasonable basis.
Yeah.
So I would go to Ruby for JavaScript in a lot of cases for similar tasks like task running or even exactly something like Middleman.
So that leads me into the question about these the front end frameworks. So Middleman seems like it could be a decent generator for an app that is an Ember or a Angular based fat client. Is that the case, or should you use their tools directly for these kind of things?
That's a good question. I would probably just say use their tools. The Ember command line tool is really, really good. It's really, really focused. And, if you're not writing a ton of HTML, we don't solve a lot of problems for you. And if you're all client side, then we're not solving your routing or like your file structure problems for you either.
Right.
So probably use their tools. But, where we succeed now and where we're seeing a lot of heavy usage is is blogs, is large documentation sites, a lot of like this kind of generated content from some other source. So you have a pile of markdown files and you want a full localized documentation site. So, people like Basho and Nest and a bunch of all these, MailChimp build these large documentation portals kind of on Middleman because they can just do a couple loops, do a couple templates, and get these large sites out the side. That said, I'm still trying to use it for my front-end work as well. So version 4, probably the biggest feature that I use on a daily basis is this ability to run sub-processes inside of Middleman. So basically what you say is, I want you to boot up the Ember CLI web server, and I want you to proxy from Middleman to that. So if 2/3 of your site and all of your CSS is in Middleman, then you let Ember return the JavaScript, and then we all just build as one cohesive whole. So I've been using Webpack a lot just because Webpack and Babel give me some nice tools on the front end to use modern JavaScript. And then that just fills kind of like the sprockets role in my Middleman stack, and then everything else is still Middleman. So we're experimenting with that. It seems to be working pretty smoothly.
Any other major Middleman 4 features? I know a lot of it has been pulling out old cruft. Is there anything else that you're excited about for the new version?
There's some light stuff. We switched to a Rails-style environment split. So before you just had, are you building? Are you deving? Now it's like, do you want to build for staging? Do you want to build for hotfix branch? Do you want to build for production? So that gives a little bit more control for multiple environments, for testing environments, and using stuff like Travis to deploy builds that maybe not ready to go into production. The other big one, I think, is moving all of our base templating stuff to GitHub. So before you'd have to install a Ruby gem outside of Bundler, hope it's there globally, and then initialize it through Middleman. Now you just give it a GitHub path or any Git path, and it'll just pull down that whole repo as like your starter template for a new project, and then it'll run your custom code. So it's a lot more similar to something like Yeoman, where we let everyone manage their own stuff rather than having to go through our like kind of Ruby gem pipeline.
Do you think it's an issue, since you mentioned, who might be using Middleman and what languages? We talked about languages and, choices and whatnot. Is the fact that Middleman is a Ruby gem, does that stop people from using it? Those who care about languages, is there competitors to Middleman and other languages that sort of make you think, man, I kind of they're stealing my thunder here?
Yeah, I mean, the install setup story for Ruby has always been pretty hard.
Right.
It's still really, really bad on Windows. So yeah, it kind of sucks. The trade-off is this is a tool you use for work. It's important. It's going to save you time. So spend the 30 minutes necessary to get your Ruby gems set up. But yeah, that's not great. There's one in Go.
What was that called, Jared?
We
just talked about that.
It's like a
Hugo.
It's like a Hugo. Yeah,
good call. Yeah.
Super jealous of that because Go gets to compile to a single, or not single, but it compiles to multi-platform binaries. So you just drag this file on your hard drive and everything's perfect. Not going to rewrite for that, but that's a pretty cool feature. And then now the ubiquity of Node gives something like Metalsmith or a couple of the other Node ones. It feels more natural for a front end person to install those libraries now, or they probably already have Node installed.
Because if your audience is a designer or a front end person, then if you're coming from NPM, you're already in their world. Basically, you're already in their tool set. There's no change there. And I always wondered if Ruby would hurt you over time, considering that the people that are writing Rails apps typically aren't building middleman sites. I guess Jared's an anomaly potentially, but it's typically somebody that's more of a front end player than a back end player.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I just think it's a tool for the job.
Anecdotally, I think a lot of people do come from Rails, and then we also have a lot of people who classify themselves as designers, but they can obviously code. Right. And for them, they didn't pick a side on the language wars, so they don't really care if they're installing NPM or Node or Ruby.
I think just on the Windows side, I think Node's first class support for Windows from the very beginning was a huge boon for its adoption. I think that served it really well. And I think Ruby's always had issues on Windows. And, there's been huge efforts to improve that, but it's always like after the fact. It's kind of like a security practice. You can't just bolt security on afterwards onto your software. It has to be, something that you think of from day one. And it seems like, cross-platform support is another one of those things that once you don't prioritize it early on, it's just really hard to get it right later. I think the Ruby community's probably suffered a bit from that.
Yeah, I as an aside, I just built a gaming PC for myself, and I haven't been using Windows for about a decade now. So I'm recently back in the flow of everything on the Windows side. So I can actually test bugs now. It's amazing. But everything sucks over here. I'm just trying to install simple things, and it's taking me 15 clicks, and I can't find the links. And I get why it's just brew install Node is so easy, and that unless without some support from Microsoft, that'll never be a thing you can do on Windows. So there's always going to be, I think, a barrier, which is kind of unfortunate. Yeah. But I would love to see better Windows support from Ruby. That's a hard job.
Sure it is. Yeah. So I got some questions about the core team and just how you formed the people that help make Middleman possible. But to take a note from Jerry, we do have to take a quick sponsor break. So let's take that break real quick. When we come back, we'll talk a bit about the core team and start tailing into some of our closing questions, which I'm sure that the internet is just dying to hear. So we'll take a break. We'll be right back. I have yet to meet a single person who doesn't love DigitalOcean. If you've tried DigitalOcean, you know how awesome it is. And here at the Changelog, everything we have runs on blazing fast SSD cloud servers from DigitalOcean. And I want you to use the code Changelog when you sign up today to get a free month. Run a server with 1 gig of RAM and 30 gigs of SSD drive space totally for free on DigitalOcean. Use the code Changelog. Again, that code is Changelog. Use that when you sign up for a new account. Head to DigitalOcean.com to sign up and tell them the Changelog sent you. All right, we're back with Thomas Reynolds, maker of Middleman. Been talking through quite a bit of history of static site generators, a bit of Go love there, where you're. I was trying to figure out a good way to say that, but just some impressedness, if that's a thing to say, from you towards the Go community about the way they're doing things too. And I'm kind of curious on that note before we go into the core team thoughts and whatnot. But I'm curious if you were building Middleman today and it was ground zero, what would you build it in?
That's a great question. I would probably Go is probably where I would build it. And I have some negative thoughts about Go, such as their dependency management requiring Git, which is a little weird. But other than that, it's a really slim language, and their whole goal is to have one way of doing everything, and that kind of aligns with, a lot of the frustration from Ruby of having 3 ways to do everything. So I think it's a nice slim language, and its compile story to different targets is pretty nice. I also, as just a joy in coding, I really, really love Clojure. Clojure has always been this close to working on Node. I think it's actually done now. So the idea of just being able to, npm install Middleman or something, I get to write it in the language with the features I like. Everyone else gets to use JavaScript for their configuration. I think that'd be pretty cool too.
So I was thinking of a name while you were talking there. Go Man could be kind of cool. Go Man, go.
Middle go. There's no good
You're
names.
always trying to name things, Adam.
I know. So
Go Man go. I like that actually.
So with a 7-year history, I got to imagine that over these years you've made some friends. Those friends have become core team members, contributors. Can you talk a bit about the history or even highlight some people over the years that have helped make Middleman possible that may not have gotten recognition elsewhere?
Totally. Have about 4 core team members now. I'm always looking for more, but it's a responsibility and it's not the funnest job to just be fielding bug reports or triaging. So Ben Hollis has been my partner for 3 or 4 years now. He is an engineer up at Amazon, and his cycle basically works so that when he's on a Middleman project, we're getting great support and great features, and we're working together. When he's not, that's cool. I'm probably on one, so I'm also contributing features. But, I don't expect year-round or even like month-round contributions from people. Just having a little bit of backup and a little someone else to check my code and make sure I'm not making a huge mistake is completely amazing. Carl Freeman has also helped out a lot. He's pretty big in the Node community, or sorry, not the Node community, the Imbra community over in Europe as well. So he, keeps me legit on making sure JavaScript doesn't get broken too badly. Let's see. Elliot Appleford has recently jumped in, and he's also in the United Kingdom. He's a much better Rubyist than I, so he's able to answer with all these years of backend experience a lot of my Ruby questions to keep me again from shooting myself in the foot. And he's doing a great job managing the GitHub and closing out things, reporting things as duplicates, all that kind of squishy stuff that can eat up a lot of time. And then recently we've had another contributor, Dennis Guntwig. Don't test my German. He is a beast, and the pull requests coming out of him are amazing. And it's just holy cow, he did this in a weekend. So having actual large feature development done by someone other than me has been really, really great. And then everyone who's ever contributed to the documentation site is absolutely amazing. There's been 113 contributors to core, and there have been. I'm not going to make this come up.
Middleman Guides,
there's been hundreds and hundreds. How many?
265 on Middleman Guides.
Yeah, 265 people who helped with the documentation, made everyone's lives easier. So they're all amazing and couldn't do it without them.
So is everyone listed under org/middleman/people? Are all those contributors then, or just only a few?
Those are all people who have the commit bit. Yep.
Okay.
So we have a couple email threads. We don't have a core, email group or anything like that. It's pretty light. But all those people have been making, invaluable contributions over the 7 years.
Awesome. I want to make sure we link up to that page. So if you're listening to this, we'll link up as well as the other individuals that Thomas has mentioned in the show notes. So the show notes will be, I think, changelog.com/169. This is episode 169, Jared. I can't believe it, man.
It's real.
Jeez. It's crazy, man.
Believe it.
But I guess, when we're talking about the people that have stepped up to help out, and you mentioned your forum earlier to allowing the community to sort of step in and you not be burnt out. Jared, we've talked about sustaining open source on this show with Mike Perrin before and several other times in other episodes. But Thomas, what kind of insights can you share that you've done over the years to guard yourself against burnout? And maybe even a touch on that could be how you've sort of fostered this community that's whether you've tried to or not has come up around Middleman.
Mm-hmm. It's just for me, I think just be nice to people. There was a whole raft of public GitHub spats on bug reports for maintainers are yelling at contributors and just not you can shut that stuff down. Same old normal people, soft skills. I get to use them. I'm a manager. I do it all day. So this is just managing random people on the internet, which is a little harder. But be nice. Everyone will be nice to you. The Ruby community has always been nice. So I think that's mostly And once you have this backup, once you have this community behind you, you're not going to get mean emails in the middle of the night. You're not going to feel as much stress, I think, about having to constantly be working on this thing. For me, I check in 9 a.m. first thing at work, do a little bug triaging, there's anything horrible, I try to fix it on the spot, but then I don't think about it until the next day. Or until I get inspiration, I find a new language feature I want to do, then I'll do that on my own free time. But, it hasn't been 7 years of continuous development. There's definitely, these, like I said, we've been stable for 3 years. So it's just been little bug fixes and me exploring on my own. I think that exploring also helps me, avoid getting burnt out or avoid just having this fear that I don't even want to look at my own code anymore. Like, you have to nip that in the bud. You have to refactor as soon as you start hating your own code. You can't just let it be there forever because you'll never go back.
That's interesting. We've like I said, we've talked about burnout several times on the show, and it just seemed to me during the show that you've whether you've tried to purposely or not, you've found something to avoid the burnout. Mm-hmm. And Jared, we had that call on curl, 17 years of curl. I mean, that guy was like 2 hours a day. And there's a commitment there. So there's a commitment. Yeah, on average, 2 hours a day for 17 years. That's like a long time.
Yeah, it's incredible.
And it seems like somehow you've found the secret to not getting burnout.
Yeah, that might just be my personality. I've also been at the same job for like almost 5 or 6 years now too. Just, I don't know, walk away. You can always walk away. You can come back. Just don't burn any bridges, and just know. I've always known that I intend to support this for the long term. So, again, keeping myself from burning out is super important to that.
Right. And when I said that guy, I meant Daniel Stenberg. I always forget people's names. I got to go back in the list and look them up and not be offensive to people, but Daniel's pretty awesome.
Shout out to Daniel.
There was just that article going around by, I forget what library he was developer of, but he's, giving up active development because there's no money in it. And try as evil 8, people are getting rich off his work and he's not able, to work this as a full-time job. Mm-hmm. But I think it frustrates anyone at a high level in open source. Some people are able to have such a crucial piece that they can monetize it through support or, contracting or even these special feature levels, kind of like Sidekick is a really good example. Yep. But yeah, so, I like working. I do agency work because I like to work. So I would like to be on the beach while people use Middleman, but I'm also probably just going to go back to work the next weekend.
Well, now's about the time we turn it over to our super awesome ending show questions. The first question, I don't know, Joe, you want to take it? You want me to take it?
Go for it, bro.
So this is the easy one. Maybe not. Maybe
it's not. Or easy one to ask.
Easy one to ask. It's always easy to ask, right?
Yeah.
So Thomas, you've been doing what you've been doing for quite a while. I gotta imagine that over these years you've got a list of people, whether you've made it purposely or not, they're your heroes. Who out there in the programming world is your hero?
Yeah, I think I mentioned. I mean, as a group, I think the Ember team has been spectacular. I think I really respect those all those folks for, having a commitment to stability, having a commitment to documentation, and really guiding their community as there's a other bunch of shiny things around, just basically saying, we're going to keep getting better and we're not going anywhere. Their documentation has been an example that I've tried to follow, and their community management is even way better than mine. So that whole team is absolutely amazing. Huda Katz is he's a Ruby master. They use Middleman over there at Tilda, and I've just kindly asked that he never look at my Ruby for fear of the look of I should probably just give up Ruby now and never do it again. But that whole group is awesome.
Very cool. Next up, we mentioned contracts. We mentioned Hamster. These are some Ruby gems that have kind of been not just on your radar, but in your toolkit lately. But if you had a free weekend and you were going to go hack on some stuff, what projects have you excited? What's on your radar of cool open source projects that you want to check out?
So I've been using Pixie.js, which is a front-end library for doing 2D graphics in WebGL. Been using that at work, been using that on the side, and it's just this kind of, Flash-like layer that allows you to get back all kinds of amazing interaction and effects on the front end. So I would definitely go throw together some kind of crazy 3D experiment. That whole project's open source, and that whole team is also doing a great job of moving their project forward.
Very interesting. Pixie is the fastest kid in town, as they say.
I don't think I've seen that.
It's amazing.
Yet.
And it's You know, uh, every single time I have to fight with a browser to animate like a square, I get super angry and I just want to throw the whole DOM and the whole browser out the window. So if I can find refuge in WebGL or find refuge in a tool like that and pretend Flash still exists, then that comforts me at night.
Awesome. So for those out there that have listened to the show, maybe they're like me and they've been following Middleman for years, or they're new and they just met you for the first time here on the show, and they want to help out. They want to kind of dig in a little bit to Middleman. What's a call to arms to the community, whether they're new to Middleman or not new to Middleman, in ways they can step in and either look at version 4 or help out on the community? What are some ways to step in as the community can do to help out Middleman?
Yeah, so I've always recommended that people just write about it or talk about it. Tweet about it, write about it, talk about it. Everyone's going to have a unique use case. They're going to have a unique perspective, and that all doesn't fit into the core documentation. So the more people, I try to retweet can't even say that word, retweet as many blog posts as I can with these really interesting use cases. I'm always surprised. Sometimes I see like Middleman extensions that I would have never, ever imagined could be written, and it's just really awesome to see. So the more you can just Google your question and you get an actual answer or even like a Stack Overflow answer, the better it is for everyone.
You mentioned extensions. That's something we didn't really dive too deeply into the show about, because this isn't a comprehensive show like, here's what Middleman is. But maybe we could take a minute to mention the extensions, the project templates, and the different deployment options you have. I mean, you've got tons of extensions there made by the community. Some, I can imagine, are commissioned, some that are just there because somebody needed it. And then you can also search those extensions as well. So it's pretty easy to sort of limit down to some things you want. Like, let's say you want to deploy onto AWS. There's an extension for that.
Yeah, absolutely. That was something, even in the Rails days, like the ability to have these plugins, these extensions was super powerful to take the load off the core team. So I tried to follow that example. One of my philosophies with Middleman, which is pretty different from most static generators, is we want you to write code. It may not be very complicated Ruby, but at least you have all the tools and the power that code gives you to make your dreams, real. We don't want to be like one of these generators that all you have is one config file or one JSON file and try to fit your entire stack, your entire pipeline to that really rigorous structure. So as part of that, we farm out as much information, as much API stuff as we can to the extension API, and that lets people do pretty much whatever they want. They can hook into most parts of the process. They can replace parts of the process. They can hook into new project template generation. They can hook in and just add a single file to the page or to the site that doesn't exist. Do an API request, get that bundle back, make that a static API resource here. There's all kinds of really good extensions because we've opened up as much Ruby access as possible to the extension libraries.
Cool.
So yeah, some of the great ones, Middleman Deploy, which one of the core team members is actually the lead on, will deploy to everything. You want to go to GitHub pages, you want to go to AWS, you want to go to any CDN, it's all built into that one package. Let you not have to worry about that. You don't even have to talk to an ops guy. You can just get your website on the line.
Very cool.
I'm hoping that one's Middleman 4 compatible at this point.
Yeah, so
I'm ready to
that's
deploy.
me slowly realizing that I'll go look at third-party extensions and be why did that break? In my mind, I made no breaking API changes. So there's Ruby makes it relatively hard to keep certain things out of scope. So it's I didn't realize that was a public method people were using. So I got to go through and either reopen a couple of those APIs for people, make them stable and public, or work with the extension authors to figure out why they're not using what I see to be as the canonical way to do the same thing.
Speaking of deploy, Jared, we mentioned a little earlier in the show when we were talking about Middleman 4, and Jared, you were ranting a bit about immutable data structures and Hamster and some of the things you've hit with Middleman 4 in the efforts of building out our news site, beyondcode.tv. So for those out there listening now, it's a brand new thing we're launching, but we've been producing Beyond Code for a while. It's a brief interview series we produce at conferences at the after parties. And so the first one was at Keep Ruby Weird. The second one was at Space City JS. The third one was at GopherCon, and the fourth one, season 4, most recently was at your conference, Jared, NEJS Conf, there in Omaha, Nebraska, which was super awesome. So we've got 4 seasons in the can. we're about to launch beyondcode.tv, which if you're listening to this right now, you can go there now, beyondcode.tv, check it out. It's probably days launched. So if there's any issues you see, report them on GitHub. It's open source on GitHub. Find a link on the site. I'm sure we'll link out to the GitHub repo because it'll be there. So if you find bugs, let us know. And as Jared mentioned, also we have been producing Changelog Weekly, our weekly email, using Middleman for quite a while. And Thomas, you mentioned your affinity for Rake, and that's how you kind of got into Ruby early on. A lot of Changelog Weekly is a big old Rake task that works with the Trello API to allow us to use Trello as a CMS. So we've been using Middleman in some unique ways, and obviously Rake in some ways as well to produce both those sites.
That's cool.
But I wanted to say that before we close the show. So Thomas, thanks so much for coming on the show. I mean, whether you know it or not, we've wanted to have you on the show for quite a while because we've had this, love affair with your software for a bit, and it would make sense to get you on the show and talk about what you've been doing and version 4 coming out and a bit of your history in software development and open source. Is there anything that we missed? Anything you want to say in closing before we wrap up the show?
No, it's been great. Thanks for having me. I'm glad I haven't given you too many heartaches.
Nah.
That's my number one fear is someone out there is cursing my name at all points in time as you get popular. So I'm glad it's been good for you guys, and hit me up if you ever need anything.
Awesome. Well, Thomas, thanks so much for joining us on the show. To everyone listening, thanks so much. I mentioned beyondcode.tv. Check that out. If you find any bugs or anything like that, let us know. Hit us up on GitHub for that. Also, Changelog Weekly, that's a weekly email we ship out every Saturday. It covers everything that Jared and I and the rest of the team finds in open source every week. Everything from our latest episodes to the most cool headlines and links and repos that we find ourselves, as well as our ping repo. So, Jared, we have a ping repo, as you know, on GitHub that we tell everybody to submit things to. So if you find something cool, check out our ping repo. It's /the changelog/ping. Submit something there to the issues. We'll link it up in the weekly email, and boom, we'll go with the dynamite. So changelog.com/weekly. Until next week, we will say goodbye for now, and I won't step on my foot today because not knowing who the guest is next week, I'm just not going to say it at all. So we'll leave the show there. We'll say goodbye now.
See ya. Thanks, Thomas.
Take care.